to the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where we champion education, celebrate community, and unite the very best of humanity. Fueled by world-class military precision and cultural excellence, Washington Tattoo produces unforgettable immersive experiences, creating an atmosphere for people, organizations, and businesses to connect, network, and build impactful relationships. We invite you to listen to this episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where the world's musical traditions come to life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Washington Tattoo Podcast. We are super excited today. I've got my co-host, Stu Warmington. How are you?
All good here.
Excellent. And we have a special guest today, Steve Gillespie. And Steve has been a fantastic friend over the years in multiple areas. So fifing and drumming professionally, and has just recently retired. He's a U.S. Army veteran of the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps, and he retired recently as the VP and COO of State and Local Government Education for NTT Data Services. So super excited to have you on, Steve. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Awesome. So, Stu, I think you always have a great question to lead with. So why don't you start today?
Well, I think this is probably one of the best questions we ask anybody, especially when it comes to the music side of it. And is, how did you get your start in music? What was your journey from when you first picked up an instrument through to your career in the Old Guard? Where did that stem from?
Well, I suspect my start was similar to yours, and that was because I had a great music teacher. Remarkable. Bill Reamer, he was a 4-time VFW snare drum champion. And he took a bunch of us in our community under his wing and started to teach us rudiments, and then took us to all types of music events. We got to see Louis Bellson, Maynard Ferguson, and of course, Buddy Rich he'd take us to. He took us up to Connecticut. The first time we saw the Yanks, our lives changed. Just when we thought our lives changed enough, we saw the Ratabangs for the first time, and it was another great environment. He'd take us down to see Buck Soisman's shop, his drum shop, and there'd be maybe 4 or 5 of us, and we'd spend 3 hours going every pair of drumsticks that Buck had in the cabinet there. We'd go through every pair, finding the perfect pair to spend our $3 or $5 on for a pair of drumsticks back then. So it was really Bill, and we called him Big because we just thought of him as big. So he took us really under his wing. He taught us in high school drumline. He taught us all kinds of things that had a lot to do with music, and then, of course, a lot more to do with life. So it was a remarkable individual that really made a difference in my life and really was responsible for my musical career.
It's incredible.
Wow. That's amazing.
So interestingly enough, when you speak about the Yanks, I mean, the Connecticut Yanks were a legendary fife and drum corps, but I mean, the fife and drum scene around that time, I mean, would have been really exploding. The idea of the Ratabangs, that this was around the late 1960s, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, them coming to the Deep River Muster, experiencing just this international music flavor started to really, I guess, open your aperture. But when you were growing up, like where did you grow up? What was the first fife and drum corps? And then how did that start to bridge into this idea of getting to know what the Old Guard was?
Well, we started out as just drums. We didn't even have fifes back then. And we came to Connecticut that first time. I think there were 100 corps there that year. It was one of the largest musters. And we came as drums. I was just early in my career, so I carried a rifle the first year before I worked my way up to bass and snare drum with the corps. But we came as drums was the name of our group. We all put our drums on top of the VW van, went up to Connecticut, camped out, and had a great time to get started there. But Bill Reamer started and co-founded a drum corps, Independence Fife and Drum Corps in Broomall, a remarkable corps. He met up with a local fifer that was in the area, and they started to train fifers and flute players. And we started the Independence Fife and Drum Corps. It was a remarkable group. And I still play with several of those drummers today. We've played together ever since we were in junior high. We have a drum group, rudimental drum group called the Troublemakers. And they are all remarkable musicians and players, many professional musicians, as well as lawyers and financial officers and everything else. Everybody has grown up, but we still get together. And I'd say we play about 25% of the time and talk about 75% of the time. But it's a great relationship that all began with our teacher.
Incredible. So how did you find out about the Old Guard at that point?
We had seen them at a muster. And certainly Bill Reamer knew about the Old Guard. And he was able to instill what it would take to get into an organization at that level. Really the practicing, the discipline, the structure. And he would take me and the other students through different things to become members of NARD and get our rudiments together, get solos together, make sure we were working on things like sight reading and to practice. But we first saw them, I believe, up at Deep River. And at that point, that was a group I wanted to be part of. So it really gave me a goal to focus on.
Yeah, incredible.
Wow. That's amazing. So obviously you've started this journey in your drum corps and then into the Fife and Guard, the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. So I want to know how this journey then went from that all the way through to vice president and COO of a company. How did that journey come about?
Well, that's of course a long story. It's not a straight path, as life never is. While I was in the Old Guard, and this is probably a lesson learned I'd like to share with folks, I had 3 years. I was a 3-year enlistment going on. And the most important thing I ever did, I realized quickly that I was very good in a narrow scoped area of music, but I was not good in several other areas of music. And I aggressively started to expand my percussion experience. I studied with Gary Rockwell in the United States Army Band and first learned percussion instruments, and he started to teach me mallet instruments in there. I then was able to audition for Temple University and studied with both Glenn Steele and Alan Abel of the Philadelphia Opera and Philadelphia Orchestra. They got me ready to go study at Southern Methodist University in a Masters of Music program down there, where I met Doug Howard, the principal percussionist with the Dallas Symphony. He had also studied with Alan Abel, and went through that. While I was there, I was fortunate enough to get a graduate assistantship while there, and was able to do some teaching while I was there. And also, one of the highlights of my life was really to be able to play as an extra part-time player with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra at that time. And it's another life-changing event. To be able to play with musicians of that caliber was spectacular. I continued to audition for orchestras at that time and went and won the audition over at Shreveport, Louisiana, and played there for 2 years full-time with the orchestra there as assistant principal. And then I came and I got to a point where, unfortunately, I think I realized I was probably not going to get a top-tier symphony job. It was pretty hard to admit to myself after 10 years. But I loved music and I practiced tremendously, and I wasn't enjoying it as much. So I looked at some other things that I enjoyed, and I was able to identify a program with a company called EDS. EDS was run by Ross Perot, a very friendly, veteran-friendly company. And, excuse me. And when I looked at the EDS, they had some development programs, and they recognized the value of veterans. And I went and did an interview with them, and I'll share here that I did so poorly on the interview that I came back and waited a month, did my homework, and went back. I had not connected the value of my business and music career to what was valuable to EDS. I just hadn't done my homework. I didn't even know how to do that. So I spent about a month and a half doing that. I reapplied as if I was a new applicant to them, but was able to get into a development program with EDS that led to a 27-year career with them, doing all kinds of different aspects of account leadership, individual performer work, product management. And then I then transferred, or really retired from them in an early retirement option I had, and then went to work for 12 years with NTT Data, Information Technology Services. I was in their state and local government group running a portfolio of their business, a regional area. and then got the position to be the chief operating officer over that group, really responsible for the delivery excellence, how we deliver, how efficiently we did deliver, customer satisfaction, the overall operations for the group. So many traverses through there, and but it was a great career. And NTT and EDS and HP, who also bought EDS, were great companies I was able to work with.
That's great. I think there's a lot of people don't realize, even if you've done 2 years to 22 years, them transferable skills that you do actually get from being in the military that are a bonus, punctuality, being on time, respectful, and, people just take that for granted, or we take it for granted. It's not till you get onto the civilian side of it that it's quite a big thing.
It is. And I think one of the struggles we have is being able to articulate. It's one thing to say I was in the military, and people kind of get that a little bit. They don't understand it, though. They can't connect by themselves necessarily what you did in the military to how it's going to benefit a company. That's our job to do that. And if we don't do that, we don't get the job. If we do, we can then differentiate that here's a person that has discipline and structure, has organized their work together to accomplish a goal. And we don't talk about it in these general terms, but you can give real examples. Because I'll ask a question in an interview. I'll say, give me an example where you had a difficult client situation you had to work through. And you don't say, well, clients are important and I'm happy and we work through those and solve problems. You have to give a real life example where maybe there was a performance that went through and it didn't work well, and you had to come back and solve a problem with them. And maybe you said that you just need to be ready for those questions to make that connection on what you did in the military and why that's not only important to the company, but differentiates you from the other people that they're speaking with.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's something I've also gone through, getting out of the military this past year, and you start to understand, obviously you have leadership, but the articulation of how that transfers is a difficult animal, a difficult nut to crack, because you're not used to having to sell yourself that way. And I think you're spot on with that.
And I think one of the most common ways that people interview in a behavioral interview will say, Mark, can you give me an example where you had a difficult client and you had to, they're really looking for an example. And most of the time people won't give an example. And even though that example is not traditional business, it may be in a music situation, you need to connect that to them. And if you can do that, and if you can give an example where a project or something got behind schedule and you had to get it back on track, a real life example, you're going to be different than most of the people they're going to be hearing.
Yeah, no, I agree. So really interesting that you bring up these teachers. I mean, you studied with the best of the best, and going through Alan Abel, studying at Temple, then going to SMU, and starting to think about Doug Howard and being a veteran himself. Were there lessons that you learned from like a leadership perspective from each of those teachers that then transferred over to your professional career later on?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to have this lineage of teachers, and they're all connected, which is ironic. They all go back to the early Philadelphia Orchestra years with Bill Reamer up to the current Philly Orchestra, to students of Alan Abel like Doug Howard, and I studied with other people at Temple and SMU as well. But they were all connected, and they did have some similar characteristics. You can't be a principal percussionist and not be 100% prepared. I mean, the example I would even give in business, I would say, if there's 100 people in an orchestra and everybody makes just one mistake a night, it's in a 3-hour performance, they just make one mistake. 100 mistakes in an orchestra, in a professional orchestra, would be totally unacceptable. It would be terrible. How many times do you actually hear an audible error in an orchestra? Well, that only comes through the relentless preparation, rehearsal, performance, and practice, and that discipline that you have, both from the military and music part of your lives, that you bring forward. So when you move that to the business world, while you're preparing for a presentation with a client, there's a team of 8 people. You've got a 4-hour presentation time frame. Well, you're going to have an agenda. You're going to have a structure. You're going to go through a practice, and you're going to do it live. You're going to do these scenarios where everybody has to come in with their shirt on. You're going to check what's in the background of their screens if it's a Zoom interview. You're going to see how well they do, and you're going to prepare questions, but you're going to prepare, and practice that just like you would for a music performance to make sure you get to that level. And then you have to actually act like you're calm and you're not nervous.
I mean, it's interesting. You know, you use this, you know, going from like a practice to it, putting it into your job. So, you know, Mark's just got out the military recently. I was a few years before him. What did you find the transition was like? Did you know, was it easier going from a structured routine into a bit more relaxed, or were the civilians a bit harder to work with in the military, or easier? How did that transition? How did you feel it went?
Well, when I first transitioned, I went into an education setting. I was going to Temple University for my bachelor's in music, but it was absolutely different. I came into it really respecting education, and that I had something to learn, and that I was there to learn. I think you see that in a first time, whether it's going to college or the first time job or the first time job after the military. You go into it with that approach, and you need to. It's unique that you get a restart, right, in your life. You get a second career. You get these things. So don't squander them. You know, you want to take it seriously. You also have to be respectful that not everybody's in that same spot. You can't come in as the military person, throw in discipline and structure in an environment that's not. They're going to be concerned that you can't be collaborative. You can't work in an unstructured environment that values what everyone says at the same level. So you just have to prepare for that mentally and make sure how you're presenting yourself. Is that the way you want to present yourself? And does that work with the team and communicate effectively? It's easy to come over too overbearing in an environment, or as much as sometimes we complain about the hierarchical structure of the military, when we go into the next environment, we go right to it, you know, and we don't necessarily listen to what others are saying and use their input. So it's just important to be aware of your environment, and that you want to bring those positive aspects that you learned in the military, but you need to present them in a different way. And it'll be a much better objective for everybody, or result for everybody. Sorry.
Well, that seems to frame where you got your leadership skills or your leadership personality or perspective, with this starting with the old guard, 1970s, mid-70s, right? And at that time, you're dealing with the bicentennial. There's a lot of pressure for the old guard to obviously execute, you know, these internationally profiled missions. What were some things that actually shaped your perspective to get out? And just like you said, you have this hierarchical perspective, but then you have to transfer that. So what were some changes or some differences in mindset that you had to come across?
Well, it was interesting when you first got out. I think some of it was that structure of how I approached people and how I was being perceived. I just wasn't aware of how I was being perceived in those environments. It wasn't hard to do. It's just that if you're not sensitive to the environment that you're working in, you're not going to be included in it. You know, ultimately, people want to work with people they want to work with. You know, people want to be in an ensemble in a music school with people that are going to respect that, are going to come prepared, are going to be coming into that. So all those skills are good. It's just how you use them, I think, and you adapt to the environment that is really going to make a difference. When I came out of the Army, it was different. You know, it wasn't a great thing to be in the Army in the 70s. It wasn't really that well respected. Today, it is much more well received as you come out of the Army, and it's a better environment for people coming out. Service is respected and appreciated. We had just transitioned, in fact, back in '74, if you recall, we were transitioning from a draft Army. The end of Vietnam had just happened in '73 to an all-volunteer Army. For the first time, we really saw in the Fife and Drum Corps people starting to look at careers in the Fife and Drum Corps. And several of those folks that I started with stayed 20 years and retired from the Fife and Drum Corps. It was just a different environment. And no matter what that is, you have to be able to read your environment and adjust to it.
Incredible. Let me have to ask this question. Were you on the recording, the album in 1976?
Yes, I was. That was that was a remarkable experience. It's really one of those experiences you look back on your career. We had great people in that. It's the first album that we did, and we did it over at the Army Band Studio. We had started to bring drum corps style into fife and drum. There's great controversy, but we started to use more modern rudiments, faster sticking, faster tempos, back sticking, all kinds of things. We had a remarkable musician, Dan Hugo Mullins, wrote Opus 1 for us. It was our first kind of modern solo we had that took us out of some of the traditional fife and drum area. We had different parts. We had fifers and buglers that would be able to write parts that used complex harmonies and counterpoint. So we started to really branch out there, and we put that down on our first album, and that was a great experience. It was unlike any other recording experience I've ever had because we had all the time in the world. We could go over in the studio and at the Army Band Building, and we'd spend an afternoon there, and we'd spend another afternoon. Like it was no problem. And when I did recordings later in my life, we'd go in to record maybe a tune or a commercial, and you expect to have it done within 1 or 2 takes. They're not going to keep that meter running for you. So it was very different, and it was a real privilege to be on that album. I was very pleased. Every so often I'll go back and listen to it, and it was good.
Awesome.
Mark, do you have that album?
I do. It's actually hanging on the wall
All right.
here.
I'll check it out the next time I'm across. So Steve, we followed this amazing journey from the core into your higher education, and then obviously into executive of companies. Did your drumming stop with you all that time, or did you stop the busier you got? Did you leave the drum alone, or did you keep it going? And how did you juggle that with your professional job as well?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when I first started with EDS, I thought I could do both. I thought I could have this job with this company, this new technology company, and that I could also still be able to stay at a level where I could compete for orchestra positions. And that just wasn't the case. I could certainly have done it if I had a job that was just helping me make some money, but I couldn't have 2 careers. And I quickly learned that. And I was playing with some local orchestras up there to community orchestras. And there's just not enough time to do it. You can only really have, or I could only at least have one main passion and focus if I really wanted to make it a career. Like I said, if it was a job, it wouldn't have been a problem. You can do both. One career is about what you can handle. 2 is they're both so intensive. It just wasn't possible. I still played recreationally. I'd still play with sometimes a local community orchestra, and certainly stay with my drum ensemble if I was back in Philadelphia. But I couldn't do both, I found out.
No, I think people realize that. And I was the same. I left the Marines where, we were drumming all day, every day, and it was your job, it was your passion. So it was great. And then you've got to leave and get a proper job and start working for a living. And that, that passion then takes a side step, and before you know it, you've not drummed for, 12 months or 3 years. And it's then hard to get back into it. So, yeah, I fully understand that. I'm pretty sure Mark's having the same, going through the same thing at the moment as well.
Yeah, when you start working on a couple Basel marches and you're trying to get those super, super delicate doublés down, they're not so easy if you don't play every single day for a few hours. But it's fun, though. You look back on it, and to be honest, one of the things I've asked myself was, why am I doing this? Why do I still want to play? And it was hard the last few years in the old guard. My last 4 years, I was really just an administrator. I would play occasionally, but I was doing all administration. The years before that were honestly the highlight of my musical career. And I look back on that as just such a special moment that was my time. My time was really between early 2012 to 2017. Those years were unbelievable, and I could never repeat that. And so I felt like I was able to say, been there, I did it. It's time to move on. There are leaders behind me that can lead. And I still play for fun, just like you say, Steve.
Sure.
But you start to recognize that, it is. It's time to move on to do other things.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Awesome. So, question here: there are things that you brought up with leadership principles, different characteristics, and one of the things you highlighted was the awareness piece. That to me is critical because there are even things that I start to like look back on and went, I said this or I did this, and I was not aware at that time how that military presence does come across. So, are there leadership principles or like common attributes that you feel you have taken with you and maybe some of those have adjusted over the years?
Yeah, again, I think they all apply, but you have to take the good and the bad. I had to get much more humble. I'll guarantee you that. When you're really playing great and you're on the top of your game, you think you're hot stuff, and you're not. That you had to get humble and understand you needed to work in a collaborative environment. You needed to listen to and respect other people because you had this very narrow scope that you were great at, and you still are. But now you have to expand that scope and that aperture. And it's very important to be able to go into that environment and recognize this style doesn't work. And that humility that you bring in, asking for help, it doesn't mean you don't have to lead. A leader has to lead, and you have to have the courage to lead. You have to be able to go through both good and bad with business, with employees, with all those aspects. There's times when you really have to lead. If someone compromises a value, you shut it down right away. There is no discussion on that you have to be. So there's critical moments, and these critical moments in time where you'll be and you have to drive leadership. There's also critical times when you have to pull back and listen. And being an individual performer, as you somewhat are in the military, you're part of a team, but you have your job, and it's very encapsulated. In the business world, it's not like that. If somebody needs help in another area, you go and help them in that area. If you need to learn something, you go learn it and do that area. You don't stay in your swim lane necessarily. It's really that collaborative environment that helps do some innovative and great things for clients as you go forward. And it's just a change. You have to be open to that. Now, the discipline and structure all comes to it. As a COO, believe me, we had performance metrics. We reviewed those metrics weekly. On some accounts, we would review those metrics daily to see what our performance was to those metrics. We'd review those with our clients. We'd review our metrics and their metrics on a periodic time. It may be a week, it may be a month, it may be an executive review once a year or once a quarter that you have. So all those disciplines you bring forward, but you bring them forward in a different way, and it's not as hierarchical as we certainly have in the military.
So, Steve, I know you said you still play with your friends, but obviously you've come through a whole orchestral side of it as well. Does music still play a big part in your life? Is it a way to escape daily pressures? Do you go out to the theatre, or how do you relax?
Absolutely.
In your life?
Yeah, it absolutely is a big part of my life. I enjoy playing, especially with my friends. I enjoy going to events. It's kind of funny. I don't go to the orchestra as much as I would like to, mainly because I always say there's only one good seat in the orchestra. It's in the very back. It's not in the orchestra hall. It's not in the audience. It's the best sound is when you're playing in the back with the percussion section. Mm-hmm. And that I don't get. That you can't buy. That you have to earn. And but I certainly love music and enjoy it in every aspect. It's a joy to be able to see my sons grow up into music, to be able to coach the Chester County Youth Orchestra percussion section and some others. It's an absolute joy that hopefully I can return some of those things that were given to us by our teachers.
That's amazing. We had so the last podcast we did, we had Doug Howard on. We got chatting about different genres of music. We got onto film scores, and this is the one thing I'm quite intrigued in what everybody likes. What is your favorite film score? Just out of interest, coming from that type of background.
I don't know what I'd pick for a film score. I love John Williams stuff. I mean, it's just remarkable. If I love the films with the underdogs. I mean, if you play the first few melodies of Rudy, coming onto the field, and it's those type of films. But I don't think I have a favorite one. I certainly love classical music. There is
Yeah,
nothing like classical music um, out there. So I love all those ones with big orchestrations, and I love them also because as an extra with the Dallas Symphony, if I got the privilege to play with them, they need to hire people. And so if they need an extra third or fourth percussionist to play Stravinsky or Rite of Spring, nothing gets better than to be able to play those type of big pieces that really highlight percussion and give you the opportunity to play with a group like that.
incredible.
I love that you really bring up this humility piece. To me, that has been something from the very beginning. Nick Antanasio would always teach is like never talk about your drumming, let it speak for itself.
Yeah.
And I think that was very interesting getting out of the military because sometimes you don't realize you come across as not humble because of that hierarchical structure. But you saying this piece about, fitting inside the orchestra, to me, that is fantastic. But there's also an interesting connection that I didn't realize until really today. The symphony in Shreveport, I've had friends for years that have played through that because I did my undergrad in Natchitoches and would go up to the Shreveport Symphony all the time. So who are some of the people you played with in Shreveport?
Well, Chandler Teague, you probably have run into Chandler. He was the timpanist there and was a remarkable player. And Robinson.
Yeah, Anthony Robinson.
Anthony is another remarkable player that I was able to play with. And we played in Shreveport, and then we jump over and play over in Longview and some other orchestras in that area. But it was a great experience. It was the first time I was kind of on a payroll with an orchestra. And to be able to learn with Chandler and learn from him and play with people of that caliber really just took it up the next notch. So they were great folks, and it was a great experience.
Wow.
Wow.
So last couple of questions. Are there specific projects or things that you've been a part of with your non-musical career that you're really proud to look back
on? There's been a lot. I mean, I worked with a company, NTT Data and these other companies that really focus on helping customers. And if you can help someone, that's a purpose, right? That's a purpose you can take with you in every part of your career. When COVID struck just a year and a half or so before I retired, when COVID struck, there was a project up in New York City. New York City Department of Education supports 1.1 million students. They have 1,800 schools. They are massive. So they need a big company to help them out. And we had done a lot of work with them. We were rewiring all those 1,800 schools and putting in a wireless infrastructure. But COVID hit, and now we had 1.1 million students that couldn't go to school, not in a traditional environment. Not only that, but we had probably 700,000 of those students that were not able to get access to an internet or didn't have a device to be able to go to school. So this happened almost overnight. And because we had done such good work for the school district, they came to us and said, can you help us? We need to implement a remote learning platform and devices. Can you come and help us on that? It was said with more panic in their voices, I can tell you that. The mayor was under a lot of pressure, right? But we had done a lot of work with them. This is not what necessarily an information technology does. We can help a platform, but they had all the tools. What they didn't have is devices configured and in the hands of students that could help them learn. So they asked if we could help them with that component. And we were able to, over several months, get 700,000 students iPads that were configured, structured, protected with the right software on it, delivered to their individual homes out and do that. And that was a remarkable project. We had warehouses set up. I mean, when in my career did I think that we would be ordering a full 18-wheeler full of boxes, and we'd have them showing up every other week or so, or things that were really outside our scope. But the beauty of working for a company like that is, I talked about, you have to be able to get out of your swim lane. This is something we didn't do, but they knew the type of people we were, and we knew what our team could do, and we put it together. And we're able to work on a project with remarkable team players that would get together every day at the end of the day after working many, many hours. I don't think I ever worked an 8-hour day, but these people worked so hard to be able to organize all the partners, the warehouses, the structuring, the delivery, and everything, and track devices that went out not to a location, went to individual homes that we had. And ultimately, the beauty of that was we were able to get 700,000 kids a device that could help them learn during this COVID period. And that, it's those type of things that are remarkable in your career. It's not that we made a bunch of money or this went well. It's really if you're able to help somebody in the public sector environment that I worked, you have that privilege to be able to do things that really make a difference, that you're really helping the CDC. Now we're working in the background, but we're part of a team to make sure they have the right devices configured to work on solving a virus, getting laptops into students. They are the things that are a true joy to be able to look back on, and to be able to say that you worked with a team of great people. At the end of your career, you really don't remember the projects, you remember the people. And that's what it's all about. And if a leader has any job, is to have great people on their team. That's the number one job. And then support them 100% and have their backs. And I was very privileged to always be able to work with great teams and great people. And that was a true joy.
It's the fact that you bring up this conversation, right? It's like the bricklayer. Am I making just a brick, right? Oh, I'm making a brick that's going to go into the wall. All right, I'm making this wall. That's what? It's not just a wall. It's part of this cathedral. And it's like you're a part of this constantly bigger thing, right? So, yeah, I love that perspective.
I always thought it was funny. The one story I'd share with people is, I don't know, I'll probably get this wrong, but I forget if somebody was got down at the Johnson Space Center and they were walking in and they saw the janitor and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." I'm sweeping the floor. And I think if we could all approach our lives that way with the end result, does what we do really matter to people and help them out? But he was putting a man on the moon. He wasn't sweeping the floor. And we weren't just delivering boxes we were helping kids learn.
I think what's incredible is that, that wasn't what you'd set out to do. A lot of companies in the pandemic changed their whole business structure. And, Evans Dadari who make the Evans drum heads, they stopped making heads and were making face shields out of the same mylar, and everybody just changed and said, right, how can we help this out? And it's not what we normally do, but we'll help you out. And obviously your company was exactly the same. So that's amazing.
No, it's a joy when the customer trusts you and your company trusts you, because we had to move so quickly. We couldn't get contracts in place right away or anything. We were fronted enormous amounts of money to go do this, and we'll figure it out later. And everything worked out. Everybody was honorable with it, and it was a great experience, I think, for everyone.
Wow,
awesome.
Incredible.
Well, I'm going to throw one last final question here, and it's a little bit different from the final question we had sent over. But in the idea of mindset transition, I do a lot of reading. Are there any books that you would recommend from either a leadership perspective or a mindset transition perspective? Would you recommend any books?
There's so many out there. I think the TED Talks are great too. The last book, and I tend to listen to them while I hike the hike, and I do a lot of hiking. The last one I read was great, The Power of Habit. And it's talking about getting habits, positive habits, and setting those up and setting cues in place so that you do those type of habits. Certainly applies to a musician and learning to practice and going through that discipline, but the power of habit, and then replacing some bad habits. There's things in our lives where we waste too much time. We all waste too much time watching a TV or something, and things that don't matter because we don't have something else to do. And I found in the most recent book, I'd say The Power of Habit, I thought it was a simple book that really had some good practical things to do. There's several others out there, but I'll give you my most recent one that I think really was positive.
Well, and great. And so right before we chatted online here, we were talking about a couple organizations that you're now a part of as you're retired now. So if folks that were interested in being a part of some of the things that you have started to do in retirement, or any organizations that you would like to give a shout out to, who would some of those be?
Retirement is a great opportunity. You might get to play one more round of golf, but I don't play much golf. But a couple of the true joyful things that you get out of retirement are being able to spend some time helping others, doing things. I have two volunteer things that I've done, and I prepared 5 years before I got out and retired to help kind of get started more in these organizations. The one is a search and rescue team for lost individuals. We have canines that go out with us. We're very trained and certified. We're complete volunteer, and we help find people when they get lost. It might be someone with dementia, it might be a student or a child with autism, might be a hiker that got lost or a hunter that got lost in the woods. We go help find them. And that's a charity. So that's an on-demand. The phone could ring now, and we might have to go out and see if we can find a child that got lost in the woods or so. The other one is Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon's a veteran-based organization that does disaster relief services. So when we see the hurricane and the disaster that occurs on the news, Team Rubicon's probably already staged there. Last year at Hurricane Ian, down in Florida, we had trucks staged up there. This is a very large veteran-based organization to go in and help do key things that have to occur right after disaster to help people. That means cutting down the trees, giving access to the elderly so they can get in and out of their driveways. It means tarping their roofs and covering them with tarps so that it's not completely damaged. It means removing the mold out of the buildings that we have and stripping it down to the studs so that the next repair folks can come in. It means going in a basement and carrying out buckets of mud, because when it floods, everything fills up with mud in the basement. You got to take it out bucket at a time. This is a remarkable group of veterans, and we also say civilians are always welcome, but it's about maybe 50+% veterans. We go out on these missions. It's a very structured organization that just helps people get back on their feet after a disaster, and especially in those very first month or two that occurs in a disaster. And it is a true joy to be able to spend not only a day doing it or a couple days, but to be able to go out for an 8-day period. They fly you out to a location, all at their expense, and give you great equipment. They give you great housing where you're able to spend, sleep on a cot with 80 of your friends in an American Legion, and really have a purpose to just help people. And it's a great joy and a part of retirement that I'd encourage everyone to plan for. And if you're interested, Team Rubicon's a great place to start for veterans.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, Steve, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Your story is inspiring, and seeing how you've started the very humble beginnings from Deep River, Connecticut, to working with the Old Guard, to the Dallas Symphony, to NTT Data. I mean, you've lived really a storied career, and I'm grateful for your friendship, and I just want to say thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you all, and thank you for your service for both you guys as well.
Cheers, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you. If anyone liked today's episode, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll have another fantastic episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast coming up soon. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Riley again. We want to share a great opportunity with you to get your business name out to our listeners. We are looking for individual episode and yearly sponsors for the Washington Tattoo Podcast. So if you love music, history, and want to support military veterans, please take this step with us and consider being a sponsor. For information on that, please email marketing@thewashingtontattoo.com.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. For PSAs on the best services available to veterans, go to VA's new radio outreach page, news.va.gov/outreach/radio.